Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to our year one Hawza. Actually, it's year two of year one because we started the year one of year one last year. And we've successfully graduated our first students who are now in year two. And now we're again starting a new cycle of year one, which started in October of this year. So it's wonderful to have you all on board, and it's nice to see some new faces with us today, and also nice to have some old familiar colleagues. You're not old, you're young and beautiful. Young and beautiful familiar colleagues back with us on board today. And as we just discussed in the preempt to this recording, as it were, to this class, to this Hawza, I wanted to start by giving everyone a little bit of background, what this Hawza is and what the teachings of Sayyid Mahdi Imam Razvi alayhi salam were, who he was as a person, and give you a little bit of background on that. So maybe just starting with where we are and what this is all about. So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, without further ado, jumping in. So a Hawza, as such, for those who don't know or are not familiar with the topic, is simply a learning institution generally associated with Shia Islam, okay? It does not mean that there are no Sunni Hawzas. It does not mean you cannot be a Sunni or even a Khariji or Ibadi and be a part in a Hawza. That does not mean that, okay? What this means is simply that the tradition of the Hawza as such is basically predicated on the historical epistemology or teaching method of the Shia Muslims. And in many ways, it comes from the history of, Shia Muslims in different contexts having had to hide or somehow protect their theology from the completely open environment. So in other words, without being able to teach in kind of large madrasas that were financed by different governments or sultanates or institutions of different kinds, but rather having to gather in homes or small communities or somehow, without wanting to use the overused term underground, but somehow, hidden from the eyes of necessarily the dominating authority. So these kind of smaller, kind of more comfortable suhbat-like institutions were created, and the teachings were taught from, teacher to student, but much less than a kind of hierarchical system. This was much more based on simply passing the knowledge and then having a dialogue around the knowledge. So I want to be really clear on that. Anything that I might, propose to teach in this class or simply give, open the window so that the light comes in, if you will, please, understand that this is a dialogue movement. So I definitely, your contributions are expected and desired. And, many of the inputs that we have in this Hawza particularly, I've seen this over the last year and a half since we started with the Hawza, we started creating this online Hawza. A lot of the great contributions have come from Sunnis or have come from Shia, 12er Shia, Imami Shia, as it were. So this is not strictly limited to Zaidi Islam, yeah? For those unfamiliar with Zaidi Islam, as it were, Zaidi Islam is a form of Shia Islam. It means that, to make it short and sweet, we love Imam Ali and the Ahlul Bayt. We follow the Ahlul Bayt. These are the family or the household of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as mentioned in verse 33 of the Quran, as mentioned in several of the hadith, both Sunni and Shia hadith, and as differently interpreted by all the different sects of Islam. Okay, so we won't go too much into that now, but simply to say that that Zaidi Islam tends to strike a middle position in many topics of what is called fiqh or jurisprudence, Islamic law, between Sunni, typical Sunni tradition schools and Shia schools or Jafari schools, 12er Imami schools. So we tend to find a middle way on many issues of the law and of the interpretation of certain hadith, and particularly hadith, but also of course Quran, and also, you know, whom do we accept as transmitters of hadith, whom do we not accept, why, and so on, and what is the methodology behind that. Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit about Islam is reason. Okay, so why does Zaidi Islam, why do we view reason or rationale, or what's called ul-aql in Arabic? Okay, why do we you know, at-taqilun are the ones that use the aql in the Quran. Okay, so the ayats are open for the taqilun, for those who use reason. So in other words, the ayats of the Quran open up to those who use reason, okay, to those who apply their aql. This is what is one of the, you know, great, beautiful ayat of the Quran al-Karim. Okay, so why do we use reason? Particularly focus on this will be one thing we talk about today. But again, before we go further into that, so Zaidi Islam tends to be positioned in many ways between Sunni Islam, you know, classical Sunni Islam, and classical 12 or Shia Islam. And you'll find this on many subjects. You'll find this on subjects related to, you know, the issue of Imam Ali versus Abu Bakr, the issue of, you know, the imamat after Imam Ali, Hassan Hussein Zain al-Abidin, you know, what happens after that, alayhum as-salam ajma'in. And also, you know, how do we relate to the different schools of fiqh inside of Islam? In fact, many people say that the Zaidi fiqh is very close to Hanafi fiqh. Okay, so one of the things that's often said about Zaidi Islam, particularly the Yemeni school of Zaidi Islam, you know, which is of course, you know, surrounded in many ways, well, by Sunni countries, but also of course by bordering Oman as well. Okay, so we have an Ibadi country also right next to Yemen, whereby the Zaidis have tended to live more in the northwest of Yemen, near Hudaydah and those places there, where the Zaidi imamat actually reigned for more than 1,000 years. You know, it's not a short time, right? So I'll take 1,000 years. But in fact, this is the Hadawi school, and they are very close in many ways to Sunni Islam. But there are other strains of Zaidi Islam, because the whole epistemology or the teaching system of Zaidi Islam is that it's very dependent on the particular imam that we follow. So in other words, you know, we have in the 5th generation, we have Imam Zaid alayhi salam, and we have Imam Bakr alayhi salam. And interestingly, it's permissible for a Zaidi to follow both of these teachers, okay? It's permissible for us to follow both Zayd ibn Ali and also Muhammad Bakr ibn Ali, and alayhum as-salam ajma'in, and take teachings from both of them. Why? Because as Zaidi, we are very open to the source of information. We're very open to the source of teaching, as long as it corresponds with reason, as long as it corresponds with al-aql and it doesn't contradict the Quran. But as we would always say, anything that consists of reason would never contradict the Quran, okay? So it's all in a matter of how do we view the Quran? Are we viewing the Quran through the lens of reason, or are we applying different sets of belief systems to the Quran which actually themselves contradict reason, and therefore we cannot get to the truth, okay? We'll get into all that a little bit later, but I just wanted to explain a little bit about Zaidi Islam. Another important aspect is that Zaidi Islam allows, as we wait for Imam Mahdi alayhi salam to appear, in this case, we have the same eschatology or the same, you know, viewpoint about the ending times of civilizations as basically all of the Muslims, inshallah, most of them, which is that in the end days of humanity, that Imam Mahdi alayhi salam will make himself known, will reveal himself as the Mahdi, and will gather the people, particularly the Muslims, for one final jihad in this so-called dunya before the next stages of eschatology occur, you know, Yawm al-Qiyamat and all of that. I won't get into that now. But basically, where the Shia groups differ, one of the points where we differ, Zaydi Islam, Ismaili Islam, Ja'fari Islam, is that, you know, is the Mahdi alive today? And he's in hiding, or he's not yet been born, okay? So the Zaidi and the Ismaili Shia say the Mahdi has not yet been born, he will be born, and he will relieve humanity from oppression and suffering, inshallah, alayhi salam, wallahu a'lam. And the Ja'fari Shia say he is alive, he's in occultation, meaning he's in hiding, okay? And in the right moment, he will also reveal himself, inshallah, alayhi salam. And in fact, there is also a kind of a ma'navi, or a hidden secret of the Imam Mahdi, which is that for those who believe deeply in him and seek him, they can find him, for example, in a dream, for example, in a vision, in different mystical ways. So there's actually a way to mystically channel and connect to Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. And believe it or not, I've actually myself had the extreme honor and pleasure, without knowing why on earth I ever deserved it. Certainly I didn't deserve it, to dream of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. And I saw a very big, beautiful Imam lying in the grass and sleeping, as it were, with a wonderful smile on his face and radiating light. And I woke up and I realized that, for me at least, and this is a very personal view, don't take this as a view from Zaidi Islam or even from a teacher, it's just a personal view. It really doesn't matter whether the Imam Mahdi alayhi salam is alive today and hiding somehow, or he's yet to be born physically, because the fact is that he's spiritually manifest, okay? He's spiritually manifest and he's intellectually manifest. We're talking about him, so that means he's manifest. At least in the realm of sound and thought, he's manifest. We say his name, we think the thought, he's manifest. While I understand that for, let's say, for the dogma as such, neither of Zaidi, Ismaili, or Ja'fari Islam, this is necessarily a fully acceptable tenet, or even for Sunni Islam, because most of the Sunni schools, as far as I'm aware, also accept the eschatology of the Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. This obviously, you know, might not be an acceptable, somehow very conform or standard, let's say, a way to look at this dogmatically, okay? But it's a personal experience, please take it as that, and do with it what you will. So these are some differences between Zaidi Islam and Sunni Islam on the one hand, Zaidi Islam and the other Shia schools on the other hand. Thanks to Tehran John, I'm starting to learn a little bit about Ibadi Islam. My Ibadi Islam knowledge is extremely weak. And we're waiting for the day when Tehran John will create his own Hawza and teach us about Ibadi Islam. But until then, I have to confess my weakness in this area. So without further ado, before we jump into the life of and the teachings of Sayyid Mahdi Imam Razvi alayhi salam, are there any questions on Zaidi Islam, as it were, right now? Because I'm sure there are a million questions, yeah? I'm sure there are a million questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. Are people understanding me when I speak English? I'm sorry if it's a bit chaotic. Particularly our friends from Bulgaria, do we understand each other? Okay, great. I see thumbs up, that's great. Any questions so far? Any questions on Zaidi Islam? Okay, if no questions yet, I'm gonna jump into Imam Razvi alayhi salam. This is Imam Razvi, or let's say this is a picture of him, okay? And this very noble and fine gentleman was born in Bihar, which is a northeastern province of India bordering on Nepal, in the year 1930, alayhi salam, to a Sayyid lineage of Zaidi teachers and families going all the way back to Imam Surpukht Buhari, based in Bukhara, okay, in modern day Uzbekistan. And this is why this lineage is called Zaydi Bukhari, okay? Also, to differentiate it somewhat from other lineages of Zaydi Islam, as I just mentioned, the whole point about Zaydi Islam is that there's always a living imam in every generation. So what all Shia believe is that Allah would never, after having brought the imamate, would never leave the humanity or the dunya without at least one representative properly teaching the credentials of Islam, as it were, through the lineage of Ahlul Bayt. So the way that we in Zaydiyya interpret this is that as long as a Sayyid teacher, in other words, a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, through his daughter Fatima bint Muhammad alayhi salam, exists, and this Sayyid fulfills the criteria of imamat and also takes the responsibility in that sense, if you will, that's also a criteria, and accepts the responsibility of taking this imamat on his shoulders, then we can refer to him as a Zaidi imam. And in fact, without going into great detail, if we study the life of Sayyid Mahdi Imam Razvi, there we go, then we realize that in fact he does fulfill these criteria, which, to make it very simple, I mean, there are different lists of different criteria from different Zaidi teachers, but to make it short and sweet, he's a Sayyid following the lineage of Imam Ali Reza alayhi salam, the 8th Imam of Shia Islam. So that means he's a Sayyid, so he qualifies. He's a male, he qualifies. He's a very erudite and very knowledgeable scholar, so he qualifies. And he's ready to take Zaidi philosophy and imamat for his particular context on his shoulders and teach the people. In that sense, practice jihad in the way that can be done in this generation. One thing about Zaidi Islam characteristic is that if you see oppression or injustice, you should rise against it, okay? Now, this has been, done very differently in different times in humanity. Imam Zayd alayhi salam did it very dramatically by leading a charge against the corrupt Umayyad caliphs of the time, and of course, becoming shahid in the process, losing his life and becoming shahid alayhi salam. So this is a very, let's say, exposed example or very clear and deliberate example of what this uprising means. Imam Razvi alayhi salam would always say the jihad of our generation is teaching and interfaith dialogue, okay? Dialogue, basically dialogue. And keeping the flame alive, if you will, by explaining to people what is Zaidi Islam, what are the principles, what is the jurisprudence, and what is the kalam and the irfaniyat, meaning what is the philosophy and what is the mystical knowledge behind Zaidi Islam, inshallah, wallahu a'lam. So the point being that there are different lineages in Zaidi Islam, okay? The main and most famous lineage of Zaidi Islam is located today in Yemen. We spoke a bit about Yemen, northwestern Yemen particularly, is called the Hadawi Yemeni Zaidi madhab, okay, or school, and essentially refers back to Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam and his descendants, who are all Sayyids, Ahlul Bayt, and so forth, and who developed the fiqh or the usul from Imam Zayd alayhi salam to its current present-day state, okay? Now, of course, the Yemeni Hadawi brothers and sisters, many of whom are in our chat as well. If you look at our chat or our Facebook page, which I just added most of you to, some of you to, when we start to follow those discussions, you'll see that many of the fiqh related questions, they're often answered by the Hadawi brothers. I tend not to jump into those issues too much. I try to focus more on the kalam and the irfaniyat and some of those aspects. But we're very open, and we're in good, deep dialogue with the Hadawi family as well. We consider them ours, and we're all part of a larger family of Zaidis, of Shia, of Muslims, of humans, of creatures, of Khalq, okay? So in that sense, with everything being related, having said that, still there's a differentiation between, because each imam brought their own particular, let's just call it flavor or, you know, taste, dhawq, as Sheikh Suhrawardi would say, Shahabuddin Suhrawardi, I recommend his literature to all of you. As his mystical teaching was the taste or the intuition, or somehow the flavor is a little bit different, okay? But the basic creed and the teachings are very similar, if not the same, very much overlapping, yeah? So we follow the Zaidi Bukhari, kalam, if you will, or lineage. And this means we have a high focus on reason and rationalism, okay, and also a specific, and this may be, you know, somehow an Indian taste, a kind of a curry flavor, yeah, that we get a lot of curry in there because there's a lot of mysticism also, a lot of irfaniyat, a lot of tasawwuf. You'll often hear that Zaidis are against tasawwuf somehow. They don't accept tasawwuf. Well, this is not true. I wouldn't even say it's true for the Hadawi Zaidis. I don't believe it's true for them. I just believe, or what I research, is that they focus more on what's called tazkiyatun nafs, which means the cleansing of the soul or the purification of the soul through asceticism, zuhd, and all of these kind of practices. And whereas the Bukhari, you know, lineage being based in Central Asia and India, it definitely has a more, you know, dhawq or mystical feeling to it. Let's say in terms of direct vision, experience, meditation, exercises in Batini Islam that are more, let's say, exposed or expounded in that particular direction. So the irfaniyat is a little bit, let's say, deeper in that sense, or perhaps broader. So these are some differences, but again, not to dwell too much on those, but this is a little bit about the teachings of Imam Razvi alayhi salam. And his whole history is that he's, you know, he's brought up in a Zaidi family. He's, you know, he's learning all of the tenets of Zaidi Islam from his father alayhi salam. And then 1945, 1947 happens. So the end of the Second World War, which coincided with the British, you know, basically pulling out of many of their colonies all over the world for different various political and financial reasons that we won't get into here. And the result of that, leaving chaos behind them in India, leading to a partitioned state, okay? And because of partition, as you may know, partition started in 1947 and was the cause of severe suffering, both Muslims and Hindus, in especially the northern part of India, what's called the Hindustani regions, and many Muslims were forced into migration into what's now called Pakistan. And of course, many families died along the way. There was a lot of suffering. But to make a long story short, also the family of Sayyid Razvi were forced to migrate to Pakistan. And they ended up, you know, building a part of Pakistan as best they could. And in fact, Imam Razvi ended up being a Sharia judge in Pakistan. So in other words, he got his training, his formal educational training in Pakistan, you know, post-partition, and became a Sharia judge and practiced, you know, some years as a Sayyid Sharia judge in Pakistan. And we certainly had a lot of interesting discussions there. A lot of what we talk about in year 2, ijtihad of Zaidi Islam, as Hassan John knows very well, is based on Imam Razvi's experiences as a judge in Pakistan. And then what happens, he's somehow on a train in India, and he sees a beautiful German blonde lady, and they fall in love. And long story short, she picks him up and brings him to Hamburg, Germany. And he ends up spending the rest of his life there, which is very nice, of course, for guys like me who got to study with him, as many other people did. And basically he started teaching together with Wilfred Madelung. Many people know who Madelung is, a very erudite scholar, particularly in the Ismaili field of Shia Islam. So together with Madelung, they were basically professor TAs under Rudolf Strothmann, who was one of the great Orientalists of his generation, one generation before, also based in Hamburg, Germany. So this is all in the 50s and 60s, if you will, of the last century. And this is how Imam Razvi alayhi salam basically gets his start in Hamburg, Germany. And this is how we get a Zaidi Imam in the West, okay? So the fundamental point to remember is, how can it be that a Zaidi Imam ends up, somehow in Europe? Okay, that's how, yeah? So that won't be on any quiz question or anything, but I just want you to reflect that Allah is capable of everything, okay? Allah is capable of everything. And he created a situation whereby Zaidi Islam could be taught in the West, alhamdulillah. And we were able to receive this knowledge for a period of more than 50 years, okay, in Hamburg, Germany, teaching at the Iranian Jafari Mosque, the beautiful blue mosque in Hamburg. If anyone ever comes to Hamburg, please let me know, and I'd love to give you a tour of the beautiful Iranian mosque. And the reason that's interesting is because Imam Razvi, okay, he's teaching at the same time, he's teaching before the revolution in Iran, okay? And he's also teaching after the revolution in Iran, okay? And this particular mosque was funded by Sayyid Hussein Borujerdi, who was a marja, one of the marjas, or one of the highest Shia 12er scholars in Iran prior to the deposition of the Shah by Ruhollah Khomeini, okay? So we have to understand what is the context of this Zaidi teaching, and why is it true that Zaidi Islam and Jafari Islam are like brothers and sisters, okay? So we're brothers and sisters on the one hand with Jafari Islam, on the other hand also with Sunni Islam, because we're very close to the fiqh of Imam Abu Hanifa, Qudus Sirat, who by the way also took classes with Sadiq and also with Bakr, okay, and with Zayd, alayhim assalam ajma'in. So we have a very deep love for Imam Abu Hanifa on the one hand, and also we have a very deep love for the Ahlul Baits, the 12 Imams on the other hand. And this is why Zaidi Islam is in the unique position perhaps to relate to all of the different madhahib within Islam and access them without creating opposition, okay? I can relate to, I actually happen to be a member of both Sunni and Shia Sufi Tariq, okay? So Turuk in both Sufi and Shia Islam, okay? How can that be without creating a conflict? Well, I don't have that conflict, okay? Because as a Zaidi Muslim, there's no clash in that. Of course, you can always, if you're focusing on the Ma'navi or the inner elements, the Batini element of Islam, you can say, okay, I don't care about Aqidah or fiqh or any of that. Just give me the fruit. I don't want the roots or the tree or the branches. I just want the fruit, okay? You can say that. I don't have anything against that. I'm just saying the other way is also possible, yeah? If you happen to, root yourself in Zaidi jurisprudence, you will find that you're able to participate in all of the Sunni discourse and in all of the Jafari Shia discourse, and hopefully with the Ibadi discourse and with all of the discourse. Of course, Imam Razvi was very open to dialogue with the Christian faith, Jewish faith, Hindus, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, atheists of all kinds, yeah? So this was another very important fundamental teaching of Imam Razvi alayhi salam, okay? What does Imam Razvi again do. So what he does is he teaches in the University of Hamburg, and in fact, he creates the so-called Academy of World Religions, one of the first German institutions, if not the very first institution in Germany, for interfaith dialogue between all religions, okay, on an eye-to-eye level. So there you have, obviously a strong Islamic element, you have Christian professor, Jewish professor, Hindu professor, Buddhist professor. There's also an Alevi professor at the moment. I think that pretty much wraps it up. And there are some different, guest speakers that come every semester and so on in Hamburg, Germany. And they teach, they give their teachings where they can. But basically, this is an interfaith dialogue center and one of the first in Germany of its kind, okay? Because what happens with interfaith dialogue, what tends to happen is that people, bring the drum and start singing Kumbaya without really saying anything meaningful, okay? But that's not really the point of interfaith dialogue, okay? The point of interfaith dialogue is to be able to, in a respectful atmosphere, talk about the differences and, and try to actually get closer to each other by examining the differences and doing what we do here in the Hawza, which is going in depth on different aspects of the fiqh and the kalam and the ma'naviyat or the batiniyat or the irfaniyat, and actually learning from each other rather than somehow, yes, everything is wonderful, but finally at the end of the day, you learn nothing, yeah? So being able to ask questions, if the tolerance is there, we should be able to ask questions, yeah? So this is the point, yeah? This is as true within Islam as outside Islam, yeah? If we really are as tolerant as we like to paint ourselves, then we shouldn't be afraid of the question, we should welcome the question, okay? We should actually encourage the question, yeah? The question should be leading the answer, okay? Not the answer should be leading the question. So one main important thing is that there will always be another question ahead of us. As human beings, we never stop, we never reach the final destination. We always have another question ahead, and another question, and another question, okay? And you open one door and you think you've arrived, and then there's 10 more doors, yeah, that open. So which one first you choose, then you choose one, and then another 10 doors come, and then you choose another one. So the question is always leading our search, and this is in fact the creation of humanity is to raise our level of energy from one level to another level by pulling us higher by asking the question, okay? Only through the receptivity to this kind of questioning, this kind of dialogue, can we in fact fill the open spaces with our own relation to the higher supreme power, which we call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? So to summarize, Imam Razvi also allowed his students to write some books, okay? So you can find some different books written by Imam Razvi, alayhi salam. And at the present moment, these books are all written in German language. So I apologize for that. We don't have translations yet. I know that some of my colleagues in Hamburg are working on translations. I happen to be writing a book myself based on the teachings that I received from Imam Ji alayhi salam. He specifically gave me permission to do this. And that's why I'm doing it. It's taking me forever and a day, but I hope to be done with that at some point. I'm actually hoping to get it out this year, inshallah. So once I've brought out the book, for those that have dedicated themselves to year one, you'll get the book basically, okay? It'll be a nice freebie surprise for those who continue the class, for those who stay in the Hawza and come back and basically stay the full year and energize my energy with the tuition and stick around for the remaining Hawzas. Basically, you'll get the book, okay? It'll be part of the package. And that also means year two, Hassan John, so don't worry. Have no fear, you get it too. But that book's not ready yet. It's still on my computer. So inshallah, that will be coming out later this year. So But the whole class, especially year one class, is designed through the 10 principles of Islam to give you a picture of what Zaidi Islam is and what the teachings of Imam Razvi were as it pertains to the present day, okay? And maybe one last word about the present day. We were talking about it in year two last Thursday. Everything about Zaidi Islam is about the present moment, okay? It's about the present moment. So that means that we don't dwell in historical this and that, the battle of the camel and, you know, the fall of the goat and somehow the tumble of the squirrel or anything like that, but we're really based on today, okay? So what's happening today and what's happening in our environment right now, okay? There's the COVID pandemic, okay? There's massive government spending all over the world, which is indebting future generations. There's the creation of cryptocurrency. There are flights to the moon and to outer space, okay? There are new novel medications and vaccines of the sort that we've never seen before. We've never seen on this level of humanity so many billions of people being vaccinated with the new genetic technology, okay? This is happening before our very eyes, okay? And we're happy to say that Zaidi Islam has the tools and the prerequisites, flexibility to be able to handle all of these issues in an Islamic format without leaving the principles of Islam, but actually by embracing the principles of Islam. And so, in fact, one of the issues we're looking at in year two, as we discover the jurisprudence of Zaidi Islam, is in fact government spending during the time of COVID. Is it halal haram? Is it darurat, not darurat? Darurat meaning a necessity. Does it belong to the area of qanun rasmi, which is the law of the country specifically where we might be living? So all of these issues, you know, we're looking at them in an Islamic format. And we're not lazy, we're not leaving the scholarship, you know, to some hadith books that were written, you know, more than 1,000 years ago. But on the other hand, we're also not denying those if somehow or other there's value in them, okay? If we can find value in those kind of works, then of course we accept them, okay? There's no reason not to accept a hadith as long as it's consistent with al-aql, with reason, but also we don't simply accept a hadith for the sake of accepting it. We have to check it through the lens of reason, okay? So these were some very short explanations. And I was lucky, by the way, my relationship to Imam Razvi alayhi salam was that I was fortunate to be his last, if you will, master student, taking private classes with him in the last year and a half of his life, alayhi salam. And basically, what I teach is basically what I got from him and what he asked me to pass on to all of you and to anyone who's listening. And whoever wants to be touched by this vibration will be touched by it. Whoever wants to accept a part of it can accept. Whoever wants to accept all of it can accept. Whoever wants to move in a different direction can do so. So that's a short summary of Zaidi Islam, of Imam Razvi alayhi salam. And I see we have a gentleman on the call, Mr. David. I think it's the brother of Ervin, is it true? Yes.
Yes. I was on another Zoom meeting for programming and just got ready right now.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. If you like, you're welcome to switch on your video, but you don't have to, okay? You don't have to. Thank you very much for joining. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to
Alaikum assalam.
Welcome to the club of crazy Zaidi guys, okay, and ladies, okay? One lady, many guys, okay? Welcome to the Crazy Zaidi collective. All right, thank you for joining us. Just so you know, this video is being recorded and we will put it online. So afterward, David, John, if you missed the first part of it, maybe you can speak with your brother about the class. And also you can go back and you can watch the video and take whatever learning you want from this class, okay? So
yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Okay, so you understand my crazy English, right? When I'm bouncing around between subjects and connecting dots and all of that, right?
All right.
Wonderful, brilliant. Okay, excellent. So does anyone have any questions now? I tried to really briefly summarize Zaidi Islam and also the life and teachings of Imam Razvi alayhi salam. Does anyone have any questions at this present moment? If you don't have questions, you can ask later, either in the chat or on the Facebook page, or you can send me a question by personal message, but you can also ask it now. Okay, no questions, so let's dive straight into the material. Today, as I mentioned before, we have two subjects that we're actually going to handle at once. And as I said, it's a great injustice to handle these two very broad topics in only about half an hour, 40 minutes. But I will try my best, and I highly encourage you to continue the discussion in the chat, on the page, in the homework. So by the way, after every class or every Hawza, we have this Hawza once every month, okay? The year one Hawza is once a month. The year two Hawza, which goes into the Usul al-Fiqh, or the principles of Zaidi jurisprudence, we have that Hawza every 2 weeks, okay? And Irfaniyat is the year three Hawza. It's coming next year, inshallah. So, and no, we won't have it every 3 weeks. For the mathematicians among you, I don't know, we might have it every 3 weeks. Let's see what we do. Not quite sure yet. So for now, we have this class once a month, and I give a homework at the end of each Hawza, okay? And I am gonna kindly ask you to form teams, okay? It's actually a teamwork, all right? And what I'll do is create chat rooms, and in each one of the chat rooms, I'll ask you both or all teams to develop the question, ask each other, prepare maybe a few sentences or a paragraph in writing that that you think would be a good contribution to the group. And then the next Hawza would start with going through last month's homework, okay? So you basically have one team exercise a month, and it's a teamwork. And okay, if one of you guys 1 month is a little bit slower than the others, then next month do a little bit more, and somebody else gets to take a bit of a break. But basically try to support each other and work very well in your teams, inshallah. Okay, so that's the format of this teaching. And without further ado, the two principles that we'll tackle today, or at least touch upon, are principle number one is Islam is reason, okay? Or actually, this is principle number two. And principle number three is Islam is freedom, okay? Freedom within responsibility, okay? Because I know some of you guys are out there and you're saying, well, if Islam is freedom, why can't I take an AK-47 and go to the middle of Paris and start shooting everybody down because I feel like it? No, that's not what we're saying. That's not what we're saying when we're saying Islam is freedom, okay? We're saying in the Zahiri sense, or in the outward sense, Islam is freedom because it provides a path of liberation within whatever societal context you may have been given or granted or placed in, okay? Our sister Samana mentioned today in the chat that she was happy to see that subjects like freedom were discussed, particularly freedom for women, okay? This is a very, very important subject for Imam Razvi, was the liberation of women through Islam, not in spite of Islam, but through Islam particularly, okay? And there is both historical precedent for this as well as theological precedent in this, okay? In other words, we see examples of how the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam liberated women by, firstly, of course, prohibiting the killing of baby girls or the burying alive of baby girls upon their birth, which was an ancient pagan tradition in the times of the Jahiliyyah, a'udhu billah. And on the other hand, also giving women rights for the first time in the Arabic Peninsula in terms of earning their own income, in terms of inheriting income, in terms of speaking in front of judge or in court situations, in terms of many different life situations. And in fact, maybe the greatest examples are simply whom he chose to marry. He didn't just marry any woman. He married Khadija alayhi salam and was in a monogamous marriage with her for all the rest of her life, 25 years. And she was actually a widowed merchant, okay? A very wealthy widowed merchant. And of course, her status both as a widow and as a very financially sound, a rich lady, okay, put her in a position to be a very independent woman, okay? And she could have been with anyone, or she could have been with no one, but she chose to be with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, okay? And so all of these examples show us historically different precedents of freedom for women, okay, in the Islamic context. And we could continue with the Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam, that in fact all of the line of the Ahlul Bayt does not go through the male lineage, but it goes through the female lineage of Ahlul Bayt, okay? So in fact, it goes through Hazrat Fatima alayhi salam. Another beautiful example. There are many examples like this. I could continue forever, but this is just one example of how liberation in a Zahiri context, in other words, in an outward context. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term Dahir and Batin, Allahu Dahir wal Batin, okay? Allah is the outside or the outer or the manifest, and Allah is also the inside or the hidden or the occult, okay? So Dahiri and Batini Islam complement each other. They're not opposition, okay? We have some sects in Islam which are expressly Zahiri sects. We have some sects in Islam that are expressly Batini sects. Well, both come together and form the full Islam, because just as Allah is the outer, al-Zahir, he's also the inner al-Batin, okay? And therefore, when we talk about freedom, we talk about the Zahiri aspect, and it's really not only for women, it's for children, it's for, you know, older generations, younger generations, it's for the rich, it's for the poor, it's for people of all different creeds and tribes and nations. It really doesn't matter as long as you have been born into the human experience, as long as your soul has been given a human experience, you have the right to freedom, okay? You have the right to freedom. If you're an old, white, rich man, then you have the right to freedom from yourself, okay? And Islam can provide that. So this is the outward aspect. And the inner aspect, of course, is freedom from lower energy, lower body energies, al-nafsul amarra, okay, the lowest form of nafs as we go through the different nufus to nafsul tazkiyat, the purified nafs in our highest energy body. Well, how do we get there? This is a batini discussion, okay? But to make it a long story short, by practicing Ramadan fasting, by lowering our eyes toward the opposite gender, by consistently eating things halal that are halal, avoiding things that are haram, also in our daily lives, money transactions that are halal, avoiding money transactions that are haram, and focusing on inner practices of different kinds, we can also liberate ourselves on an energetic level and therefore reach ever higher stages of the nafs, of the inner soul, okay, until we reach the stage of nafsul tazkiyat. And this is, of course, the freedom of the batini freedom, if you will, or the freedom of the self from the self, okay? So Islam is freedom, happens on many different levels, but this kind of distinction into Zahiri and Batini is maybe an easy way to explain it. Simply means the Zahiri aspect, freedom from oppression and injustice through the outside world, in the civilization we happen to be living in, or the context we happen to be living in, but also the inner expression of freedom, liberation from ourselves, literally from ourselves, from the things that are keeping us down, okay? No one in our generation, we don't believe, is, as they say, ma'soom, so no one is perfect, okay? The 12er Jafari Shia might say Imam Mahdi is ma'soom. He's the only one living today who's ma'soom, alayhi salam. However that may be, we certainly are not there yet, okay? So there's a certain inner purification that takes place along the path, and we try to approach this through batini freedom and expression, freedom from ourselves, okay? Our biological self, our mental preconditioned self, that which our parents taught us, that which our society taught us, all of these can help us on one level toward liberation, but they can certainly also impede us or prohibit us from reaching liberation. So we have to determine what of this outside conditioning will help me to reach my goal of freedom, and what of these outside external conditions are actually prohibiting me from reaching my internal state of freedom, okay? So are there any questions right now on, well, somehow I ended up starting with the third aspect, Islam is freedom, but this was very condensed, okay? Are there any questions so far on either the outward aspect of freedom in Islam or the inner aspect, or perhaps some historical aspects, or anything that anyone wants to ask at this point? Go ahead. Or any comments at this stage? Okay. If none, let's take the next step. Let's, if you will, go backwards. And for those who weren't present in the first class, the very first Hawza we had, or the second, which was about the first principle of Imam Razvi alayhi salam, what we talked about was Islam is humaneness, okay? Yeah, there's a word in Arabic which the philosophers, the contemporary philosophers in Jafari Islam use, which is called insaniyat, okay? Insaniyat, which means humaneness or humanity, okay? Insaniyat, in German, it's called Menschlichkeit, okay? This is what Imam used to say always, alayhi salam, would say, Islam is Menschlichkeit. So Islam is humaneness, or is insaniyat. It means that we always put the human being at its highest level, at the center of the discussion. What we mean by that is, and he used to say, if it's not humane, then it's not reasonable, okay? So al-aql, in that sense, and also you know, freedom, tahrir, if you will, is not really reasonable, or is not really freedom as such, if it does not take care of, you know, humanity as a whole. So in other words, I cannot justify my freedom by pushing down on other people, okay? Or I cannot claim to act within a framework of reason if I'm not somehow, you know, taking care of humanity and humaneness, okay? You know, an example, you know, the Iraq wars or the Afghanistan wars, where the United States was claiming to invade these countries because of freedom, okay? Well, since the Iraq war, obviously more than 1 million Iraqis have, you know, been killed or died through starvation or other issues of malnutrition, indirectly or directly because of the war. And similar situation has happened now in Afghanistan. And so we cannot say that this represents true freedom, because freedom should have been conditioned or preconditioned by humaneness or humanity. If that were the case, then this so-called freedom would never have had to be expressed in that manner. So therefore, we can neither talk about humaneness nor freedom in these cases, okay? Now, clearly, to both of those global situations, there's a lot more background, and there are a lot more, there's a lot more that can be said about that. But these are just quick examples why we cannot talk about freedom and we cannot talk about reason without first speaking about humaneness or humanity. Humaneness, I love, I'm here in Istanbul now since about 6 months. I have the pleasure of, having moved here, and alhamdulillah, and just to see how the, Turkish Muslim people with their Ottoman tradition and their history, and I'm guessing it's, going to be quite similar in Bulgaria, they really, they take care of all the cats and the dogs and the birds and all the animals in the city. I've never seen birds and cats and dogs so well treated in any part of the world as I've seen here in Istanbul, okay? And it's particularly one of they're actually so-called vakıf or awqaf, which are the foundations, the financial foundations that were created by the Ottoman Empire, some of which are still existing today. And you'll actually see them, extra awqaf, which are actually spending money to take care of the cats, the stray cats and the dogs and the birds. And so you have this whole, parallel animal culture happening here in Istanbul, which, for an 18 million metropolis is a pretty cool thing to see. So this is the humane or humanitarian aspect of Islam as it's really coming forth here in Istanbul. And you can also see it on the human level, where Turkey has taken over 4 million Syrian refugees since the start of the war, okay? And more refugees, of course, than any other country in the world. Well, Saudi Arabia is an Arabic country, and you would think that as the staunch Sunnis, they would have also taken in many refugees. They haven't taken in one single refugee, okay? And in Turkey, we've seen them take 4 million refugees. So the level of humanity here, as displayed by the Turkish Sunni Hanafi Maturidi population, is extremely high, and I'm extremely appreciative of being able to take part in some kind of life here in Istanbul, and to see this with my very own eyes, Islam and humanity being practiced on a daily basis, okay? So this is a little bit about the first principle. Islam is humaneness or humanitarianism, and this conditions all of the forthcoming principles, which is why I mention it again. Islam is reason, okay? Islam is freedom. Freedom, yes, but conditioned by humanitarianism or conditioned by humaneness, okay? It's not about getting an AK-47 and starting shooting in the middle of Paris, okay? It's not about oppressing others to realize your own freedom. These are excesses of so-called freedom which lead to oppression, not only of others, but for those who understand al-mizan, okay, al-mizan, the balance, okay, or what in yogic circles is referred to as karma, for those who understand the cycle of karma, also oppressing yourself, okay? And because any oppression of others is definitely going to meet in the same amount back to that whom oppressed, okay? So whether this is visible or not for the human eye, and whether that all takes place in this experience of dunya or on another level of dunya, that's another story. But to make a long story short, both Islam is reason and Islam is freedom are conditioned by Islam is humanity or humaneness, okay? And I want to make that very clear, because many people have done terrible things in history with the trivial excuse that it was a reasonable thing to do, or that there was no other way to do it, or that somehow it led to freedom. But as long as there's a karma involved, as long as there's a cycle of karmic energy involved, it's not yet freedom. In fact, freedom is the liberation from the karmic cycle, okay? So to reach freedom, the first step is to liberate yourself, and to do so by acting in a humane way and method as much as possible, inshallah wa Allahul a'lam. So that's the first principle. We talked about the third principle, Islam is freedom. How about Islam is reason? So what do we mean when we say Islam is reason? And I think I have the pleasure of welcoming someone else to the group, or did they come in and leave again? Okay, I think someone came and left. Okay, so we'll just continue. I have the I have the pleasure of at least welcoming reason to the table. And when we say Islam is reason, and we talk about at-taqilun in the Quran, and what is meant is, the ayat of the Quran open themselves to those who practice reason, okay? And what do we mean by that? So what does that mean? So if I only read the Quran, okay, if I only read the Quran by the lens of my preconditioning, in other words, where I was born, whom are my parents, what is my outward societal context, well, unless I'm living in some kind of a golden generation or some very special context, I won't have reached the heights or the pinnacle of what I could be experiencing when I read the Quran. So one thing that Imam Razvi alayhi salam would say is, read the Quran as though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were speaking directly with you, okay? So reading the Quran becomes a very direct and personal experience. And it means that there are no intermediaries, okay? So La ilaha illallah means exactly that. There are no intermediaries between you as a human being and the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in whatever context you can experience that, okay? So everyone's a little bit different. Fully experiencing the Creator is not possible in this existence as a human, except some mystics have said, bil fana fillah, okay? So within the burning of the soul, or the identity in that sense, the highest ma'navi, or the highest irfaniyat, which is the dissolving of all identity and the experience of tawheed, of ittihad with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as those mystics such as Ibn Arabi, as Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, as many of the mystics have discussed, okay? But this level of, let's say, intense unity with Islam requires a certain approach to the Quran, a certain direct approach to all of the teachings of Islam, as though Allah were directly communicating with us. And this is why Imam Razvi alayhi salam would say, read the Quran as though Allah were speaking directly with you, okay? And this is perhaps the first step of reason in that sense, because it means that we don't rely necessarily on others' interpretations of Quran. Yes, if you go to any, madhab, if you go to any university or academic institution, except for this one, you'll be confronted with a lot of, big, thick books and a lot of, Arabic or Persian or Turkish literature, commentary over thousands of years about what is Allah, what is Islam, who are the Sahaba, who are the Ahlul Bayt, what did they say, what about the next generations, this, that, the other. Now, I'm not in any way discounting all of that or saying all of that has no value, but what I'm saying is, and this is what Imam Razvi alayhi salam would teach, is that this is all secondary supplemental information that can or cannot help you to reach the true Islam, which is your particular experience in the dunya as it relates to your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because it's your responsibility you should take the responsibility and view everything through the lens of al-aql. So we should read the Quran as though Allah were speaking directly with us. We should make sense of it in our own context, and then we should apply it in our daily lives as we experience it. The same is true for the hadith. Okay, there are many different collections of hadith, as you all know. Some of them are Sunni collections, some of them are Shia collections. I'm just going to ask Tehran here, do we have anything like an Ibadi collection of hadith? Anything like that?
Yes, we do. It's called the Musnad of Al-Rabi'a.
Okay, so we've got one, or
but we use Sunni. I mean, more recently, Ibadis use Bukhari, Muslim. You know what Sunnis would understand. But for it's a long topic. But yeah, we have the Musnad of Al-Rabi'a.
All right, thank you very much, Tehran. Thank you very much. So maybe someday we'll have a special Hawza just to ask our erudite Ibadi scholar here in the room, what about that Ibadi madhab? Because certainly it's a very interesting subject. From time to time, just for everyone who's new here, we do special subjects, special Hawzas in between. So like last year when there was a crisis in Palestine, we did a special Hawza on the emergency in Palestine and how we in the Hawza could support the Palestinians as best as possible, and even the Israelis, to find a solution in Israel-Palestine that could benefit all involved. So not that we're reaching too high here, but we tried to do what we can. So there are always a different Hawza from time to time. We had a special Hawza from Muhammad Farhan on financial aspects of Islam at some point last year. So we do different Hawzas from time to time. So if anybody wants to do a special Hawza, you know, please come forth and be free to use the platform. Just let me know in advance and we can plan it, inshallah. So we see there are different collections of hadith from all the different madhahib. And as Zaidi Muslims, we also say we can use any hadith book, any tafsir, you know, any kind of secondary source of Islam or tertiary source of Islam, as long as we apply the aql. So what Imam Razvi alayhi salam would always say is, if a hadith is reasonable or has been checked by the lens or the filter of reason, then it can be considered as accurate and applicable for a particular context, okay? The flip side of it is that if, and that he also made it very clear and was very explicit, the flip side is that if a hadith is completely contrary to reason, then we must reject it, okay? And it's our obligation to reject it. Now, the argument can be made, who are we to reject hundreds of years of scholarship and say whether a hadith is reasonable or unreasonable? But the simple answer to that is, we are complete and full human beings. And in fact, it's our responsibility as human beings. It's part of the haqq that Allah has put on our shoulders during this human experience, that we differentiate what is reasonable and unreasonable according to our experience with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, it would be impermissible to accept a hadith without checking it against reason, okay? On the other hand, it would also be impermissible to reject a hadith just because we don't like it, okay? So if there's a hadith, it's like eating your vegetables, okay? Why did mama always say, first eat your vegetables, okay? Because as the children, you always want your dessert, okay? But first, please eat your vegetables. You might not like it, but it's good for you, okay? And we talked about the different levels of the nafs, okay? So sometimes the nafsul tazkiyah wants something that the nafsul amarra or the nafsul lawhimma don't want, okay? But these things are good for you. So one example is maybe fasting in Ramadan, for example, okay? So so we take the hadith that are complying with reason, even if we don't like them, okay? So this is a condition. Our own, let's say, lower desires should not prevent us from accepting truth whenever we see it. And in fact, truth in itself is Islam, okay? Find truth and take truth wherever you find it, even if it should be in China, is an example of a hadith, which is, at least in my humble view, wallahu a'lam, fully compatible with Islam, and in fact, in many ways expresses the Zaidi approach to Quran and Hadith, okay? So this is, again, a very short and very brief summary and treatment of Islam is freedom, Islam is humaneness, and Islam is reason. Okay, the first three principles of Islam according to Sayyid Mahdi Imam Razvi alayhi salam. And of course, all of these subjects, again, they could be, and they have been subject to great theological work, study, research, epistemology, history, paleontology, anthropology, and all of that. And we don't deny any of that. But we're saying in this room, in this context for you today, okay, Islam is humanitarianism, Islam is reason, and Islam is freedom. Wallahu a'lam. And with that, I'd like to once again open the floor to any further questions or comments. I'm happy to receive those now. We have a few minutes left, 6 minutes exactly, before I feel that I've done my homework for today, giving all of you a 90-minute Hawza. So if no questions or comments at the moment, then yeah, go ahead, Tiran, please, go ahead.
I was just wondering about the book, The Establishment of the Clear Exposition, and where does that factor into the Zaidi school of thought?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a key work, in the Hadawi tradition, right? And if you're talking about the book from, is it, you'd have to remind me, is it Imam Hadi or is it, was it Rasi? I'm trying to just remember who it was that dropped that one. Can you remind me?
I think it might be Rasi, but Hadith.
Might have been Rasi, right?
Okay.
It was one of the two. I'm not quite remembering. I'm not too familiar with the Hadawi tradition, to be totally honest. So I would say, drop that one definitely in the chat, and the Hadawi brothers, I'm sure, will be happy to answer that for you. In our lineage, we would say, take the thing, take it, read it, go through it, and see what it means for you, okay? Because again, you can even say that the Hawza itself, yeah, the Shia Hawza, or the whole idea of the Hawza, is a treatment in epistemology, okay? And it's created at the time when, this is a very interesting time when, you have Imam Zayd alayhi salam, you have Imam Baqir alayhi salam, you have Imam Abu Hanifa, Qudus as-Sirat, you have Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and you also have, on the other hand, you have Hassan Basri, Qudus as-Sirat, you have Wasil ibn Atta, Qudus as-Sirat, and they're all creating these, theological circles, and sometimes these circles are actually interchanging, and they're passing knowledge from one generation to the next, okay? So Imam Zayd alayhi salam was actually the first to write a book on fiqh, and this book was called Majmu' al-Fiqh. And from this exposition, this whole idea of the usul al-fiqh was born. And then, of course, the different imams in the Ahlul Bayt expanded on it, and Imam Abu Hanifa alayhi salam and all of the other imams and his students, they followed up and they expounded in their way. And then, of course, the other schools, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, and so on were developed. Okay. The Clear Exposition is a book, I think it was Rasi, I think you're right, alayhi salam, which I'm not particularly familiar with personally. But what I would say is, it's a book that was written in its time. It will have its truths in its time. It will have formed a strong part of the Hadawi creed, the Aqidah, if you will. And that will have formed how the Yemeni Zaydis have, in that sense, seen or shaped their Aqidah, which, as I said, I mean, it's very similar to our Aqidah or our Kalam. To be honest, we don't really have an Aqidah in that sense, because we're so close to Mu'tazili Islam that basically the only Aqidah is use the Aql, right? And try to apply it through the lens of Ahlul Bayt as much as you can. But basically, if it's true, you can take it. You can take it from a Christian, you can take it from a Jew, from an atheist. If it's truth, you're obligated to take it. And maybe that's the clear exposition of today. So that's the best I can give you. But brother, I would ask you, please ask the question, drop the question in the chat, and let the Hadawi brothers jump all over that and give you an answer on that.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Any other questions for now? Okay. If none, I'd like to close today's session with a little team exercise. I'd like all of you, hopefully, I'd love to see you all again next month. It would be the last Sunday of the month. If you have time and space, feel free to mark that in your calendar. We'll be going through another 2 principles of Islam according to Sayyid Imam Razvi alayhi salam. The homework will be, please try to find an example in today's present context, and you can choose, okay, in your particular teams, either Islam is humanitarianism, or Islam is reason, or Islam is freedom, and why or why not, okay? You're also welcome to refute the principles, okay? If you didn't like today's explanation from your humble teacher, if you feel that Islam is not freedom or Islam is not reason, you're welcome to say that. Please bring that. Please explain why. Or else try to find a good example in today's dunya. How can we see where Islam is freedom, or Islam, where is Islam liberating us, okay? Or where is Islam, how does Islam liberate us? Or how does it expand our subset of reason as subjective human beings, okay? Or how does Islam help us to attain a more humane perspective on our human experience? So if you can, please, in your teamwork, think about that, chat with each other. I'll be glad to create the teams, put you in the teams, and feel free to toss those questions back and forth. This is how the Hawza would actually work, okay? Of course, we're all online. It's a blessing and it's a distraction at the same time. It's a distraction because we're not here personally, although you're all welcome to visit us here in Istanbul anytime, visit our Hawza. This is an actual room here in our apartment, and we'll have a real Hawza anytime any of you come. But of course, the blessing is that we can speak with people from all over the world. You know, we have people in the chat that are from Los Angeles, from Alabama, from the UK, you know, from Bulgaria, obviously, from Iran, from Singapore. I'm here in Turkey, you know, from Germany. So, you know, we welcome everyone from all over the world, and that's the beauty of the online Hawza. So this is the format that we have, and we try our best to make it as personal an experience as possible. Wallahu a'lam. So thank you all very much for joining today, and I do hope to see you all in the team chats and see you in the next Hawza, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam. And if you don't mind, please everyone read a Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful week and month, and inshallah we'll be in touch.
Salam.
Alaikum salam. Take care.